Trumpet of the last few days. I'm Stanley Farrar.
And
I'm Robert Farrar.
And I'm Joshua Farrar, and our order is slightly messed up. Even our standard positions on the screen is different than normal.
Mine stayed the same.
Yeah, you guys can't see it on my screen, but mine and Dad's normal positions are swapped.
Probably because I'm using different equipment.
Yeah.
We had some computer complications this morning. So we've had to adjust, adapt, and overcome.
Semper Gumby.
And none of us are Marines, so that's hard.
Yes, being none of us are Marines. But I spent years in the Navy and worked a lot with the Marines, so maybe some of it rubbed off. Once it rubs off on you. Once it rubs off on you, you can't get rid of it. It's kind of like a plague.
From my experiences with Marines, you really don't want that stuff rubbing off on you.
Oh.
You know, a lot of people that I used to work with would just arbitrarily start lines to mess with Marines. See how long it took for them to just start lining up.
Well,
I take it worked a lot.
Oh, every time.
Your granddad and some of his friends used to fall into ranks and start marching along next to where the Marines were marching on the other side of the fence. And Marines go through their and so they would get into to lines, and they'd go through there, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. See, we can count higher than 4. Now I have to be kind to Marines because I've had a great many Marine Corps friends, and have had much better success with Marines coming to church than I have had with anybody else.
Yeah.
So.
That doesn't surprise me in the slightest, actually. My interactions with the Army have been too limited, so I can't give too many opinions on them, other than old vets, and they don't really apply to modern circumstances. But the Air Force is always too stuck up, and the Navy typically is too debaucherous.
But the Marines have a reputation for being both stuck up and debaucherous.
They're also the most likely to respect other people's opinions and listen to someone who they respect. If you earn the respect of a Marine, you've got their respect, and they will listen to you. Doesn't happen that way for someone from any other branch.
Now, we find out what people's priorities are by looking at what they do first and foremost when they're going through things. So we now know what the great pretender Biden's and priorities are. the reason why I'm using the term great pretender is because that's the historic term for somebody who claims to be king but has no right to the throne. They're the great pretender.
Mm-hmm.
Well, currently, Biden, the pretender, has started taking and carrying forth the offices of President of the United States, despite not having won the election. By looking at the priorities of the pretender and chief, the he went through and signed 12 executive orders the first day in office. So that shows what his priorities are. On his first day in office, he put thousands of oil workers out of business. By shutting down the Keystone Pipeline.
Mm-hmm.
And cost billions of dollars.
And cost millions of dollars. And it will also take and raise the fuel costs. So we'll actually end up taking and finding our gas prices go up because of it.
Which they already are, but...
Mm-hmm. But it'll probably go to his glory days in the Obama administration when we were looking at $4 and $5 a gallon gasoline.
No surprise there.
Now, currently, Canada is suing for breach of contract.
As they should.
Mm-hmm. Because as they stated, they have contracts that he has no right to shut down the pipeline.
But how would they enforce it? What's Canada going to do? Go to war with the U.S.?
Trade war.
Trade war, probably. Right now they're just relying on the courts. And it's very possible
technically
that the court,
speaking,
if they get a friendly judge, that they...
Technically speaking, the office of the president has no right to void those contracts. That is not an executive branch jurisdiction.
And a executive order carries no weight under the law.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the thing about executive orders.
So they can be ignored.
Yeah, that's the thing about executive orders is they're meant to interpret existing law. They're not meant to be law. Something which 2 presidents ago they really needed to figure out.
Well, that's one thing that they've been trying to legislate from the executive branch for the past 3 presidents as it is.
And all 3 of them have been too happy with executive orders.
That's not the way the Constitution's set up. Yeah. There are hundreds of executive orders that have been put out, and they've been enforcing them like they're the law, but they are not the law. Only the legislators can write law.
Mm-hmm.
It's like that deal with Iran that Obama did wasn't a treaty because it was never approved by Congress.
And therefore it's not enforceable.
Therefore it's not enforceable. Therefore Trump could just take and say, no, we're not going to do it. And there's not a thing anybody could do about it except for do a lot of complaining.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what happened. But we find that under the current administration, and they're saying they're going to put us back in it. But it would still be where it wasn't a treaty, so it's not enforceable. When you take and you look at the Keystone Pipeline shutting down, that automatically takes and puts thousands of people out of work. I heard from one source that it was something like 12,000 people out of work.
When our economy's already depressed, and so is Canada's.
Mm-hmm. On his very first day of office. And that's just one executive order. That isn't counting all 12 of them.
Yeah.
He went through and stopped the construction of the border wall. That puts a whole bunch of people out of work too.
Yeah. And he put us back in the Paris Climate Accords, which also puts more people out of work.
Well, actually, he's yet to sign that executive order. He says he's
Okay.
going to. He hasn't yet.
No, he can't do that by executive order. That's got to go through Congress.
But the agreement for the Paris Accord was never approved by Congress.
So it's unenforceable.
Right. See, that's one of the things that a lot of the things he plans on doing with executive order, and which means that by law they're not enforceable.
It means that either he doesn't understand
Except for the fact
the legal system as it stands, or they're trying to make everyone forget that we have a legal system and just go pure dictator.
I think pure dictator is probably the direction. You take and you look at the overall circumstance here, or he plans on banning guns by executive order.
If he tries
I
that,
thought he
he's
was just
likely
going
to
to go
get
through the
shot.
ATF.
Well, he plans on going through the ATF, but the ATF does not have the right to take and make new law. He's just going to write an executive order to the ATF.
He doesn't have to write new law. All he has to do is include it under the National Firearms Act.
He doesn't have the right to amend old law either.
Technically speaking, for it to be... Now, H.R. 4717 would take and amend the law, and it's unconstitutional.
What's that one?
That one goes through and bans and a whole list of firearms. And it goes through and makes it to where you cannot own a firearm unless you're over 21 years of age. You can't even touch a firearm unless you're over 21 years of age. You cannot take and possess a firearm or ammunition without a license from the federal government.
Yeah, that's not going to happen.
You cannot transport. You can't transport a firearm or ammunition without a license from the federal government. You cannot take and transfer I couldn't give you a gun without you going through a background check first. Despite the fact that you're my son.
Mm-hmm.
When you take and you look at all the different restrictions, they're trying to shut down FTLs, which means you can buy a firearm and get it sent to an FTL and then pick it up. They're trying to eliminate the ability, the FTL, to where you cannot transport a firearm through postage whatsoever, even if it's legally your gun.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Even if you could pass the background checks, it's immaterial. They're trying to eliminate the FDL. Essentially, they're trying to disarm America. With it's the House of Representatives Bill 4717. Now, I like House Bill HR 38, which would make a concealed carry permit reciprocal in all 50 states.
Yeah. But personally, I
That's
think
never going to
that
happen.
you shouldn't need to have a permit to carry a concealed weapon.
No,
It's a
you
step in
shouldn't.
the right
Well,
direction,
It's
but it's not
unconstitutional.
enough.
as one person stated, our permit to carry a concealed weapon should be our birth certificate.
Yeah, it should be.
Now, Barnes thinks that secession is not only legal, but a good weapon to take and slap the radicals in both parties down and then to make them toe the line in the correct direction.
It's a interesting thought point. I don't see how it would smack down any radicals, let alone both of them. It would definitely be a move in the right
Well,
direction, but I don't think it would mess with the radicals.
as he as he termed it, now we're talking Congress now.
Yeah.
Um, the the Democrats have already stated that if Trump had won, they were going to secede. So they've already accepted that secession is legal.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
so
but
so secession,
you forget the great Democrat double standard.
yeah, but but they are on record supporting secession. So with that being the case, if they start trying to violate the Constitution and or going too radical in their laws, as if Texas and Florida could file for secession, as he termed it, without Texas and Florida, this the United States can't afford to stay in existence.
Mm-hmm.
They are the financial powerhouses of the nation. California may have a greater GDP than Florida, but it spends more than it makes.
By a significant margin.
And it's mostly based on entertainment, and entertainment, let's be honest, is a very, very thin basis for your economy.
It's also been
And
plummeting in the last few years.
is New York's plummeting in their GDP. So basically, he thinks that the secession is a way to get them to back down and say, no, we'll back off of these areas, just don't leave. Because if the red states leave, if it's the blue states that collapse, not the red states.
I think he's misinterpreting the tactics of the radicals.
I think he is too. For one thing, yes, it is a good weapon, but but it can't be a vacant bluff. You got to be willing to do it.
Yeah.
And I think you take and go through and set up declare that you're going to secede, and there's going to be probably a 75%, if not 80% of the Democrat Party, and probably about 30 or 40% of the Republican Party that's going to say, fine, do it. they'll call your bluff.
Yeah. And I think I would go a step further and say it's close to 60% of the Republican Party. Especially as it stands in of the politicians.
Maybe. Well, see, that's the problem with there will be a certain percentage of the politicians that are going to be opposed to it because their states would be the ones seceding, which means they may or may not be in national politics anymore.
Yeah. That's why I didn't give them closer to 80% and just held it at 60.
Because McConnell's going to fight it. He'll fight it every step of the way. Even if it means war, he'll fight it.
Yeah.
Because that's the key to his power. Pelosi, I think, will say go. Because it ensures that they'll always win.
Mm-hmm. As far as I'm concerned,
Biden?
Let them have it. Leave and just let them have it.
Well, there's a large portion of the United States that feels the same way.
Leave and let live.
Let them drown in the swamp that is DC.
The thing is that it's with the fact that the House of Representatives of the individual states are the ones that determine who leaves and who goes. And the Republicans flipped several state houses this past election.
Mm-hmm.
So states that are actually represented blue in Congress are red in their actual state.
Well, so one of the highest-ranking Democrats is from South Carolina, of all places.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and see, they would secede because their Congress is overwhelmingly Republican. So you're looking at and the grassroots Republicans have a tendency to be much more in favor of secession.
Yeah.
Now the national Republicans aren't any different than the Democrats, but except for some few exceptions. But on the state level, there's a lot of state level Republicans that are supporting secession. Now, there will be some Republicans, some red states that won't choose to secede. I don't think Georgia would secede, even though the Republicans control the legislature.
I don't think Arizona would secede either.
I think they would.
All right, we've had this debate like 3 times on air, so.
Mm-hmm. But like I said, the thing is that it could be a weapon against all this insanity that's fixing to come down the pike. Biden's already crushed our national security by taking and putting out an executive order or stopping deportations, and by taking and putting out an executive order opening up our borders to the terrorist states in the Islamic nations. He has already taken and put us into a position to where we could start having terror attacks again. And he did all this on his first day.
In other news, Antifa and BLM are rioting again.
No surprise.
They actually tried to burn down the DNC headquarters in Portland.
Well, at least now they're attacking the right targets.
Well, it's a slow.
That's
Slow
that's the
acceleration.
places they should have been attacking all along, rather than the local businesses. If they had just attacked the DNC headquarters,
Well,
or even just the GOP headquarters, or the local, even the local government buildings, I don't think there'd be half as much complaints against them. Maybe not even a third of the complaints against them. If they had just stuck to the right targets.
Well, they also attacked the original Starbucks, which I don't see too many right-wingers complaining about either.
Well, yeah, it's Starbucks. It's already a...
Leftist.
Oh, I was going to say a hive of scum and villainy. It's a proper Mos Eisley.
As we give a movie quote.
But we're probably just going to see an escalation of these things in the times to come.
Oh, yeah.
As well as counter backlash.
Especially now that the Democrats have no need to try to humor them. The Democrats got what they wanted.
Weird,
They've never been the type to pay back the ones they owe.
Well, when they took and attacked the immigration department,
nice.
The federal government gave orders to use tear gas on them. Yeah, ordered them to use tear gas on them and pepper balls.
Hey, now that the Democrats actually are in power again, just watch. BLM will be declared a domestic terrorist group within the week. If it even takes that long.
Well, they didn't get declared a domestic terrorist group despite all their burning and rioting during the Obama administration.
The BLM wasn't active during the Obama administration. Antifa was. Not BLM.
Yes, it was.
Yes, it was. With the Ferguson riots.
I didn't say they didn't exist. I said they weren't as active.
You said they weren't active, not as active.
Okay, then amendment.
There's a difference.
They were not as active, and the things that they did back then aligned with the narrative that the Democrats are trying to push. Trying to burn down the DNC does not align with the Democrats' agenda.
But they're just going to keep coming back for more.
Of course.
We know that whether they're branded a terrorist group or not, they're going to keep coming.
Of course.
Question is the right going to also have their own groups doing the same thing, or is it just going to be the left eating its own?
The left will eat their own. At this point, I highly question, because let's be honest, the right should have gone into full-out rebellion long ago. I don't think nearly enough of them have enough backbone to actually do what's necessary at this point.
Well, you'd find that they would call out the National Guard and do a nationwide hunt for any right-wing organization that tried to do anything.
Yeah.
While they'll take and be only a slap on the wrist for the BLM Black Lives Matter type because they're still their base. After all, BLM was stating not too long ago that they got Biden elected.
Yeah. In fact, I've already seen
then they were complaining because Biden wouldn't listen to them.
The rage posts online from the BLM types saying that we got you elected. You haven't even accepted one of our representatives into the office right now? Yeah. Haven't even invited them over?
Because they don't care. The Democrats want power.
Of course,
that's
the exact same post was accompanied with someone mocking it by posting that picture from Toy Story where he dropped Woody with the "I don't want to play with you anymore."
Oh my.
I mean, that's pretty accurate to their mentality.
Yeah.
Well, if you're going to take and you look at the whole circumstance, they purposefully want everyone to take and bow down to them like gods. But they're willing to bow down to the corporations who are putting all the money in their pockets. For instance,
so who's really in charge?
In California, with all the that shows who's really in charge. In California, they took and had this massive lockdown order. You know who's exempt? The corporations that spent the most money to the Democrats.
Mm-hmm.
You know it's going to be that way on a federal level now, because Google and Facebook and Twitter are going to be screaming, "We got you elected, and we're the ones paying your bills."
And Amazon.
Well, see, here's the thing, though. There are already a large number of tech executives in the government. They were already prepping for that. Because that's the way the Democrat Party works. Is they do the same thing with the media. Is they just borrow from the various different companies who scratch their back, and then they put their own people in their place. So it's a continuous cycle, just feeding in on itself.
And that's clearly the way it's working with the tech people. Because like you were saying, and if you go through and look at almost all the major media people, they either have worked for Democrats or are married to people who are working for Democrats, or will be working for Democrats themselves. While the tech, we find that Pelosi has employed people from the big tech. So has Biden. Almost all the DNC has employed numerous people from big tech. Yeah, it's the same concept. And like one representative stated, you know you're in trouble when your enemies throw a celebration when someone's elected. And that's what happened when Biden was elected. China celebrated.
Now,
but
were
China's
these
already come out
people
and said
forced to
that,
celebrate? Did they?
No, this was the CCP that was celebrating. And they even sent out propaganda about how great Biden was. And how he would overturn that the better angels in America and China now could work together and undo the terrors of Trump.
That's because he was winning the trade war, even though the media still refuses to accept it.
Yeah. But when your enemies are taking and praising you, you've got problems.
Got a lot of problems.
The question is how best to deal with it. Let's face it, a large portion of the Republican Party in Congress should be primaried. They should be gone.
Mm-hmm.
Trump is talking about starting a new party, but it's been stated that being that his followers and donators are all the lists of them are owned by the RNC and he doesn't have them, that he would have a great deal of difficulty starting a new party.
I think the problem
He
actually
could
comes
still
a little
do it.
farther along, and that's the fact that he's not young, and the party wouldn't
Yeah.
have any unifying force after him.
Except for maybe his son.
It would be like the Bull Moose Party
It's
all over again.
Eric and Donald.
Yes, you're right. It would be a lot like the Bull Moose Party. Now, his sons could be an influence. They actually think that some like um, let's see, what Henley or some of the other Republicans that took and stood with him might actually end up being the leaders of it if it happens.
Mm-hmm.
People like Cruz.
I would support Ted Cruz.
Of course, but they've taken and had a tremendous amount of backlash for supporting Trump. But Ted Cruz has stuck to his guns, and so has several others.
Mm-hmm.
But they could actually, with careful selections of who they put up in the primaries, it is quite possible that Trump supporters could take over the Republican Party.
If they want to try to salvage everything
tolerate that.
without a open rebellion or secession, they would have to.
Mm-hmm.
But frankly, I think
I'm not
it's too
convinced they're
little
not
too
going to have
late.
open rebellion and secession anyway.
Do it.
I personally think that there's going to be some open rebellion no matter what,
Yeah.
and there could still be secession. Because, as to quote uh, the representative from Texas, as being the courts won't hear people and refuse to take the cases, then that leaves where you have to act like BLM and Antifa just to be heard.
Yeah.
Of course, he's also one of the ones pushing for secession.
Oh, I stand by the fact that secession is the best option right now. Maybe the only option, apart from revolution, anyway.
Well, it's the only option. It's it still could lead to a revolution.
Yeah.
If the red states were to secede and the Congress said, no, you don't have the right to do that, then it's a war.
Yeah.
If they decide to take the Brexit approach and let them out, but negotiate trade deals and a fee for leaving, then it could be done peaceably. I'm not sure about these octogenarians that are running the government on whether they'll are rational enough to see all the possibilities.
It's hard to say.
Well, we already know that Biden's being controlled by other people.
Yeah. But that was really never in question. He hasn't been sane since before Obama was in office.
And we know that Pelosi is showing signs of senility.
Mm-hmm.
She's not that sharp. If she was sharp, she wouldn't have been showing $2,000 freezers full of ice cream aimed to explain how wonderful lockdowns were.
Nor would she have been caught at the hairdressers.
That's like Marie Antoinette. Yeah.
Except there's no evidence Marie Antoinette ever said let them eat cake.
I know that. And you're right. There is no evidence that Marie Antoinette ever stated that.
But there's no evidence she didn't either.
Actually, there are statements that she didn't.
Statements are not evidence.
She was misinterpreted.
Statements are not evidence.
Sure they are. Affidavits are submitted in court all the time as evidence. And all an affidavit is a statement taken under oath.
Usually by a witness of some sort.
And are there any living witnesses that can acclaim exactly what was said? No evidence.
There's no living witnesses.
And therefore, no evidence.
But there are people who have written... but there were people present that actually stated that it never happened, but it was part of the propaganda machine.
Oh, I'm sure it was.
But
my point is, though, that we will never truly know.
Thing about it is whenever you take and break a nation up, you don't know what you're going to end up with afterward.
That's true. Sometimes it'll be semi-peaceful, like Austria and Hungary's divide. Or Austria and Germany's divide.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you will get Rome.
Divide, which ended in conquest by barbarians, but...
Well, the thing about it is that, well, look at the Slavic nations. How many different forms of government are there?
Yes.
How many of them are free?
Maybe 2.
Maybe 2.
You have a lot of dictators. With the French Revolution, and they took and went forward until they ate themselves, and which communist revolutions always eat themselves eventually.
Yeah.
And then a dictator rose up, and they ended up with Napoleon. Well, would we end up with another United States, or would we end up with the Revolutionary French.
Or would we end up with two different states with two different dictators?
That's another possibility.
Or we could
Could be
splinter
different
into as
regions
much
end up
as
being.
50 different countries, each with their own dictator, potentially.
While most of the recent revolutions, that is to say, most of the revolutions that have happened in the last 200 years, have resulted in a dictator taking over. Remember, the Republic of Texas did not.
That's true. It did not. That's because it set up a constitution that was identical to the American Constitution.
And
And
didn't
I
allow a
think that in
military
our
coup.
country, yeah, I think that in many ways, if we seceded, the red states would set up a government based on the American Constitution. The question is which version of the American Constitution?
Good question. With no real answer.
Mm-hmm.
Yet.
But any of them would be better than where we're at.
Yeah.
The very thought and notion, though, behind secession, you're going to have to put down little petty warlords that are going to try to rise.
Yeah. That's a given.
And some of these warlords are going to be these militias. While the militias come in very handy to keep the government straight, they can also bring the government down.
Well, let's be honest. We're already seeing these things rise up with the autonomous zones.
Mm-hmm. One of the founding fathers stated that we should have a revolution every couple of years.
The population numbers would say otherwise.
But let's face it, they talk about, the political violence never accomplishes anything. The Texas Revolution sure did. And
the American Revolution
the
sure
U.S.
did.
Revolution.
Yeah, that's a weird thing to me, is so many of the people condemning the violence are proud of the American Revolution. But wait a second. The American Revolution was violent.
Well, I heard one person say, well, can you imagine any of your heroes from the American history? And he mentioned some of his. George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, and Reagan. He says, can you imagine them taking and throwing tea in a harbor? Dressing up like Indians and throwing tea in a harbor? No, I really can't. But I can tell you their supporters sure did it. Well, no, George Washington's from Virginia. That was Boston.
Yeah.
That was the Massachusetts Bay.
Believe it or not, the Boston Tea Party was panned even by revolutionaries.
Yes, it was. Even the revolutionaries didn't like it. That was because it was a destruction of private property. One of the signers of the Declaration of Independence offered to pay for the tea.
I think I had money.
Uh-huh.
You know, there was a point.
At the time, he was
This is a little off topic, but there was a point that I was playing D&D a a couple years back now, actually. And we got into a discussion about how much tea would cost. And I ended up using the Boston Tea Party to mathematically figure out how much a year's worth of tea would be in gold in the game, which took a lot of math, actually.
I believe it.
I bet it was more expensive back then than what it is now.
Well, I adjusted for inflation and that sort of thing. There were a lot of factors that went into it. But basically, one of the things that not a lot of people realize, and I'm aware that just about everyone in this conversation understands it, but not necessarily all the listeners, is that the tea that they were throwing in was basically hyper compressed pucks in like tablets, where you would take a knife and you would shave off the amount of tea that you wanted before trying to create it. And each amount was several months worth of tea on its own.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, meant to be broken up and then sold in little bits to everybody, but it was packed really, really tight for storage. That they threw away millions in today's currencies anyway, millions of dollars worth of tea into the water.
Mm-hmm.
And then somebody offered to pay for all of it.
Yeah.
Richest man in America at the time.
Before the Rockefellers.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there was a fur trapper who actually, I think, might have gotten more than the Rockefellers proportionately back in the late 1700s.
Yes, but that doesn't change the fact that it was before the Rockefellers.
Yeah, it was before the Rockefellers.
No, but yeah. But this businessman, and I forget his name, but he was one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence, is historically stated to be the richest man in America during the time, or one of the richest men in America during the time, and he offered to pay for it all. He said he didn't agree with the destruction of private property. He said if they wanted to protest, that's one thing, but not destroy.
Which I agree with.
Mm-hmm.
Until the guns come out.
In fact,
they were taking it.
I believe I've replicated that exact same stance in just the earlier part of this episode. That if you're going to riot, don't target the private property, target the public property, target the government property.
Thing about it, the Congress was taking and saying the Republicans should pay for all the damages done to the Capitol building during the riot, and I'm using the term riot loosely. Totally ignoring the fact that they know that there's documented evidence that Black Lives Matter was involved, and so was Antifa. But just the stating, well, those were Trump supporters, just ignoring the fact that there were non-Trump supporters actually egging everything on. They say the Republicans should take and pay for it. A Republican came back and said, okay, we'll pay for it if you pay for all the damage done by Antifa and BLM.
Well, that negotiation ended quickly.
It stopped cold. It's like, sure, we'll pay for the broken windows and such. Yeah, gladly. But you pay for all the burned businesses.
And toppled statues.
Yeah. The It's like they took and pointed out that they've got documented evidence of 3 people dying in the from the consequences of the DC riot. The numbers were quite high before, but when it actually researched, it came down to 3. 2 of the protesters and 1 police officer that got hit in the head with a fire extinguisher. It could go up to 4 if you count the guy who killed himself later.
Mm-hmm.
How many people have died in the BLM riots?
Hundreds.
Yeah. So they're not really comparable.
Not even close.
Especially when you figure that the police shot first into unarmed protesters.
Which is why they got beat to death with a
well,
fire extinguisher.
Mm-hmm. Now, I grant you that this was after some of the BLM Antifa types took clubs and riot helmets and smashed the windows in. So the first people to be violent were the ones directly tied to Antifa and Black Lives Matter.
Mm-hmm.
But even so, the people shot were Trump supporters and unarmed. If you're going to shoot somebody, shoot the guy with the club.
Yeah. Or at least someone who's armed.
Yeah. But somebody whips a fire extinguisher off the wall and hits him upside the head with it. In the same circumstances, would we have done any different?
Not even slightly. Unless I wasn't near the fire extinguisher. In which case, I probably would have used a chair or broken glass if necessary.
One thing that's been pointed out was the fact that they're blaming Trump for it, while this entire incursion and happening and took place while Trump was still on and his people were still on stage.
Mm-hmm.
They hadn't even said, let's march down to the Capitol yet. But it's all a propaganda war. So if we're going to look at a propaganda war, we have to sift through everything and see who's telling the truth. And to be honest with you, I think both sides are lying to us.
Well, that's a given. If you look at any situation and expect a politician to tell the truth, you are far too naive.
Yeah.
There will always be bad actors on both sides. There will always be liars. And the politicians will always try to protect themselves.
Yeah.
Universal
The
constants.
politicians have always been that way. Mm-hmm. It's one of those universal truths that you can always hold to is the majority of politicians are liars. And that one guy didn't hang himself in prison.
Epstein, yeah.
Epstein didn't kill
I've heard all kinds of things on that, but that's besides the point. But it's one of those if you're going to go down to universal truths, is we know that the media is lying to us. Has been for years.
Yeah.
Decades, you mean?
Decades. We know that the government's corrupt. Has been probably for over a century, if not longer.
Longer.
In fact, I would go so
Minimum
far as
since
to say
Trail
it's
of
been
Tears.
corrupt.
But longer.
I'd go back farther.
Yeah. That's why I said minimum.
Mm-hmm. Because let's face it, the reason Jackson got into power was he built up an organization because of a corrupt election that he got beat in. And more people voted than than were registered to vote.
Mm-hmm. Kind of like this last one.
So this isn't exactly like this last one. And that's why the Democrat Party came into existence. Well, okay. We face the same thing today. We just have a bunch of old geezers running everything now.
Jackson wasn't exactly young.
No, he wasn't. When he got beat the first time, he wasn't old yet. And we've never had a president as old as Biden.
Trump was the only one who came close.
Yeah. They used to say, well, Reagan. Well, Trump was the age Reagan was on his second term when he got elected the first time.
Yeah.
Now, if Trump was still alive and kicking and willing to run for office in 4 years...
I think you just misspoke there. We know what you meant. You're saying if Reagan was, but you misspoke and said if Trump was still alive and kicking.
No, I meant Trump. If Trump's still alive and kicking.
Oh, is still alive?
And runs for office in
Not
4 years.
Was? Okay.
Yeah.
Then I either misheard you or misinterpreted you.
No. If he is still alive and runs for office in 4 years, he would be the same age Biden is now.
Yeah.
And he was already older than Reagan when he ran the first time. So this is just... Politics have been taken over by a bunch of old geezers. And they're still operating off of a mindset that failed years ago. Trump wasn't so much, but Trump did have his problems. Let's face it.
Yeah.
That anybody who was really loyal to him got stabbed in the back, and those that stabbed him in the back got promoted and given better jobs. He kind of encouraged treachery.
Yeah.
I would have fired Barr right off the bat. For that matter, I would have fired Sessions right off the bat.
I never would have run with Pence.
Just as... Yeah, I wouldn't have either. But you take if they had the moment that he took and stepped down to where he said that he couldn't objectively look at the corruption, I would say you're no longer Attorney General.
Mm-hmm.
Bye. You recuse yourself, you have no reason to recuse yourself. Bye. It'd be one thing if he had a legitimate reason, but he didn't have a legitimate reason. It was all political.
Yeah.
Of course, I would have gone through and fired everybody in the FBI. And the Department of Justice. They would all been fired. And the IRS. They'd all been fired.
And while you're at it, you might as well do the FDA and the and the EPA and.
Well, the thing about it is the reason why I said those particular ones. We know that the FBI was actively involved with a coup.
Yeah.
To overthrow the president of the United States. They should all go. We know the Justice Department assisted them. They're gone. The IRS targeted conservative nonprofits under the Obama administration. They're all gone. You don't take and pick and choose who becomes a nonprofit according to their political leanings. You're gone. And then I wouldn't. Then I probably wouldn't even bother replacing them. I also wouldn't have tied myself to their list of judges.
Yeah, that was the last mistake he made.
Mm-hmm. And when they take and I would have just as soon as one of these judges took and tried to legislate, any judge that was tried to legislate for the from the bench, I would be taking and approaching Congress to have them impeached. Could I get it done? Probably not, but at least the they would know that I would make it quite clear that they had violated their oath of office and usurped the power of the legislature and therefore deserved impeachment. They should be removed from their judgeship.
Mm.
If you think that other judges and officials should be impeached, feel free to leave a comment down in the comments section below.
I was wondering when he'd go for it.
Otherwise, feel free
We're
to hit the
pushing
like.
an hour and 10 minutes.
Otherwise, feel free to hit the like button and feel free to subscribe as well. And please share this with your friends, your family, your enemies, whoever. Get the word out there. Until then, see you next time.
Bye for now.